well and enjoying the blazing sunshine of February, which is rather unseasonable, but not unwelcome given the slightly Baltic January we had. Thank you very much for giving up a portion of your lunch time today to come and join the webinar. Today we're going to go through a session called Growing Your Business Through Tendering, or Bid Basics. It's very much the same thing. So we're going to go through a few key things. So the session split into two main elements. Looking at opportunities and where you can find them and how to get them. And then also looking at completing expression of interest forms and any sort of additional documentation that organisations may ask for. So the running order, we're going to look at the different sorts of opportunities that are out there. We're going to look at where you can find opportunities. We're going to then demystify some beautiful acronyms. So if the welfare to work and work-based learning sector wasn't acronym heavy enough for you, we're going to talk about CPV and UNSPCS codes. I can't even say it. We're going to look at some of the tools that are out there to help you. Going to give you some hints and tips around what to respond to, so we don't go for stuff that isn't for us or is going to take a lot of time and we're not going to get actually much out of it. Then in terms of completing documentation, although I've called it completing expression of interest forms, this is the same. An expression of interest is whether you're bidding for something through an invitation to tender or a pre-qualification questionnaire, or you're going to a third party. But a lot of the principles go across the same thing. So ultimately, a bid is a bid is a bid. So we're going to look at how to get selected. Look at selecting the right prime contractor, look at what to complete and when. We're also going to look at key information and data collection, and then we're going to finish off with a top 5 tips. Okay, so firstly, we've got a number of people on here, so just so I can speak in a language that everybody understands, we're just going to launch a quick poll. And it's just all about how confident you are in tendering and bidding for work. So if you're a complete novice and you need some help, by all means, please tick that. If you've got limited experience but not particularly confident, please tick that one. If you've got some experience and understand the basics but need help and support, please let us know. If you're experienced and confident or very confident, again, please let us know. Hopefully, most of you will be in the top 3 on the screen. So if you just want to give yourself 30 seconds for people to vote, that would be great.
Yeah, coming in. I think that's probably it for the moment. Should we end it there, sort of, Steve? I think.
Yeah, if we've got most numbers through, that'll be great.
Yeah, I think so. I think
that's 22.5 seconds.
All right, I'll leave it to 30. No, give it 30 seconds. So give it 30 seconds.
That's now 30 seconds.
End polling, and I'll just share the results. Hopefully, you should sort of see that sort of now.
Cool. So we've got a bit of a split in the audience today. So we've got some people that are experienced and confident. So I'll try and, hopefully this is a refresher for yourselves. But for those that are complete novices and those with limited experience and those with some experience and understand the basics but need help, I think this will be really, really beneficial. So if we then press on. Okay, so the first bit that we're going to look at today is how to find tender opportunities. So there are a number of different opportunities out there. So first thing we're going to look at is the difference between public and private sector type opportunities. So anything that is procured by the public sector is governed by EU directives. These ultimately become UK legislation, and anything within those within that tendering is very regimented. There are going to be some changes post-Brexit. If Brexit ever happens, judging by some of the stuff that's been in the news in the last couple of days, who knows what's happening on that front, but there will be some change within that point. Any sort of public sector procurement has the requirement to be open and transparent. So everything has to be published, everything has to be clear and concise and available to everybody. There is a massive drive within the public sector to support SME businesses, and also for organisations to be have SME businesses as part of their supply chain. So whether they're local suppliers or whether they're smaller businesses or the charities, there is a real push on those type of activity. There's also a requirement on public sector organisations to publish winning tenders, to actually show that what's actually been bought and how it's been bought. I think the real interesting one in recent terms was a governmental department buying a ferry contractor that didn't actually have any ferries. I would be interested to do see what that bid looked like and see how actually they managed to get through. And so clearly that's when procurement goes a little bit awry, and there was a little bit of a lack of understanding in some of the marking there, but that's by the by. In terms of the private sector, they have a lot less governance, so they adapt a process which is more best practice than strict rules and governance. But when we're looking at private sectors, that could be organisations looking to buy apprenticeship programs or redundancy support packages, or any sort of training type work that some members provide, then it's more about best practice than those specific rules. Having said that, some of the private sector can be adopt a lot of the public sector type stuff, so have a real open and transparent approach. They want to encourage a market and keep a market open. So they have a lot of CSR policies linked to procurement. So that will be things around this, very similar to the public sector. So encouraging SMEs, encouraging charities, encouraging local organisations to be engaged. With anything that's private sector, there's generally a perception of greater flexibility and the ability to show innovation. I think over the last 6 months those lines seem to be blurring a lot more. A lot of the devolved activity has started to show elements of improved flexibility and greater ways of innovation and doing things differently, which is great. But there are subtle differences between the two things. Okay, so whenever we want to go and try and find opportunities, there are a range of different ways in which we can go and do that. So within the public sector, so if we think about the sector that we work in, so that's going to be the Department for Work and Pensions, the ESFA, local government, local authorities, anybody who's within those bits, there's a requirement of those organisations to publish tenders in a variety of public locations once the value reaches £10,000. With increased publications, once the value reaches £65,000 or above for smaller lots, and just a smidgen over 180,000 when we get to bigger contracts. Now, there once upon a time was a big bit of paper in Brussels called the Official Journal of the European Union, and in there was all the elements that anybody was buying had to be written down in that. Thankfully, we now live in 2019, so we are able to then use a number of web-based tools. That means that we don't have to wait for adverts to be placed in the Times or phone up Jean-Claude in Brussels to find out what's actually able for and out there for procurement. The reason that they have these values is to make sure that opportunities are available for all, people understand what's coming up, and there isn't the perception and or the risk of any view of it's a done deal or it's in a brown paper bag and therefore somebody's already decided who's won. That's not the case. If something's published, it's open, it's competitive, it's fair. The EU values vary dependent on the exchange rate. I mean, the pound against the euro is particularly hideous at the moment, so those values will fluctuate up and down. So there are a number of different ways in which we can find opportunities. The first one that I would always recommend people to look at is get yourselves registered on Contracts Finder. So Contracts Finder is a governmental service, and all governmental departments are required to use that as a minimum to put all their opportunities on there. So that's really worthwhile going on and getting a quick login and having a look to see what are the different sorts of opportunities on there. For a governmental portal, it's actually very, very easy to use. It's very user friendly. It's quite intuitive in the ways that it works, and it has a number of good functions on there to enable you to search for opportunities that are specific to your organisation, your geography, your specific areas. As Ursa, we are a UK-wide group. So if you're in Scotland, Public Contracts Scotland is a great resource for the same sort of thing, and Sell to Wales is the Welsh version. So again, all of these are there to help you find opportunities. So by creating yourself a profile, you're able to pull down opportunities, understand where opportunities are coming from. On a more local level, there are local portals. So if you're looking at being in a more specific geography, there are a number of different portals out there. ProContract or Due North or Proactis, it's got a number of different names, is a particularly good one to go and get yourself registered on. So all of these links on your screen are all hyperlinked, so Roger will send these out later, so please go and click on there. One thing as a bit of advice on ProContract, a number of local authorities use it, and you only need one login. So once you've logged in once, it allows you to access this in a number of different ways. So for example, with the recent AEB procurement activity, both Greater Manchester Combined Authority and the Greater London Authority both use the same service. One was badged as Salford or Trafford Council, and the other one was badged as Transport for London, but it was the same system underneath. So once you had one login, you didn't need to create another login. So it was worth going in and looking at all the different opportunities. There's much more localized activity. So I live in Leicester. So Source Leicestershire is a great one for local opportunities, and then a bit broader. We've got Source East Midlands and East Midlands tenders, all of which are really good ways of finding out what's going on in our local areas. Within the private sector, there's not a requirement for them to publish opportunities in the same way. However, a lot of big organisations have a Work With Us site page on their website that you can go on to and click on and have. So ultimately, you need to go directly to any companies, but also look at things in the trade press. So if you're in a certain sector, or you're the sector bodies, so the childcare and the health and social care sectors are great examples of where private sector organisations use their trade bodies to in trade press to be able to advertise for activity. But B2B quote is another system that's out there. There are some elements of that pick up private sector activity. So you're able to find out more about what's going on in the private sector and what are those bits that are required. Okay. So I said I was going to speak in gobbledygook at you briefly. So whenever you go on to a portal and start to set up opportunities, you'll be asked to use things called CPV codes. Now, CPV stands for Common Procurement Vocabulary. So this is a way in which organisations code activity. So it ultimately helps us as sellers find opportunities through certain codes, but then as a buyer also allows them to make sure that they've got activity within certain parts. So with everything at the moment, the CPV system is an EU part, so that's likely to evolve and change over the coming years, but it's the one that is used most frequently at the moment. Within our sector, if we look at the key codes that are there, so 80 million is your main one, which is all about education and training services. So anything that's a welfare to work program, anything that's an upskilling program, anything that's supporting individuals falls within those 8,000, or sorry, that 80 million. It's at 80 and 6 zeros. There are a number of subcodes. However, with any sort of branch system, the top one enables you to get to everything that you need to do. So there are in the subcodes there are ways to tail these down. So if you were to use 80,400,000, that would give you adult and other training services, and then there's also a staff training services, depending on what you're trying to do as a business. One thing that we're starting to see a lot more in the procurement world is the use of UNSPCS code. So that's United Standard Products and Services Code. So this is a UN system. So I think there will be a move away from EU type activity. So I suspect this may be one that they'll use, and a lot of systems at the moment have these as options. So a good example of which is the practice portals that we talked about earlier. Broadly, their codings are the same, so they use an 8-digit approach as well. So education and training services is 86 million rather than 86 million, and then rather than 6 subcodes for all the various different bits, they've got 5 subcodes, so they just vary slightly in that way. For organisations that are keen to work with the NHS, and the NHS does a lot of procurement, it's ultimately the first or second largest employer in any area, and have a wide range of services that they do buy in. They use their own version of things on their own procurement portal. So education and training services is a letter form, which is ZWM, and gives you the access to those. Then last but not least, there's a greater use of pro class categories. These is more designed for local government organisations, and when they are putting opportunities out, these tend to be used as well. Ultimately, this enables local government to see what they're spending money on, and acts as a bit of a spending consolidation tool to understand what's actually being bought by whom and where. One thing I would say whenever using CPV codes is never 100% rely on these codes. Always try and use some key words to prevent missing opportunities. Anything with codes or words is always down to the individual that puts those numbers in or puts those codes in, or the words in, because how their brain thinks and how they reconcile things may not necessarily be the same as yours. So when you're setting up these portals and setting up these opportunities, make sure you give yourself a broader chance as possible. I'm sure most people would rather see stuff they don't need to see than miss something that they'd really like to see. So just backing that up with that piece gives you that opportunity. So there are ways in which we can speed things up, and there are some tools out there to help us. So as I touched on earlier, Contracts Finder will enable you to set up free searches. So actually you don't need to set up those codings, and you don't need to pay for those codings. There are elements of B2B quote are free, and the Chest or Proactis is free, and Sell to Wells is free. So in terms of the free tools, if I was going to go away today and set stuff up, I would definitely set up Contracts Finder. I would definitely go onto the Chest or Proactis and have a system on there. And then interestingly, even if as I say, I live in Leicester, but I do subscribe to Sell to Wales because it searches in the same way, but the system has the way that system uses algorithms tends to pick things up a little bit quicker than some of the other services, and picks up some slightly different things. So it's always worth just having that broad spectrum of activity. With everything life, when you get something free, it's generally okay, but there are opportunities to have better searches, and there are a number of paid for search services out there that you can have, and these tend to be a little bit better. There is a better bit of service behind them. They're less automated. There's a little bit of human input into those to actually make sure that the service is better and stronger. So as URSA members, you can receive the Tenderlake site. That's something that I use quite regularly. It's very useful to supplement the other activity that we're doing. We've got Carly Consult produce their own tender opportunities tool, which is available for a fee, as do Tracker Intelligence, which is owned by a group called BIP Solutions, and Tenders Direct is another alternative type portal. So in terms of if you're looking at paying for a search, or pay for searches, give a trial period so you can ascertain if the service is fit for your purpose. So if you are really keen at getting involved in looking at tendering for is a way of growing your business, then start to use it'd be worth going to some of these paid for searches and have that trial period to see whether it's worth spending that money. In my past life, I was the head of business development for JHP and Learn Direct for nearly 9 years, and we used a number of different tools because it was a large national organization. We were always looking at bidding for a number of different things, so spending some money to get those things right always seemed sensible and was always worth spending that a little bit of money if that's something you wanted to do. Okay, so there are always tender opportunities. The tendering market goes up and down as every market does. At this present moment in time, there seems to be umpteen opportunities out there, and a number of different things going on. And there will be a time in the near future where it may go a little bit quieter, but it will always come back. No one's quite sure what's going to happen with Brexit and the activity that will spin out the back of that. So one thing that always you need to do is have target priorities and set some parameters for what you want to bid for. Bidding for opportunities takes time, it takes effort. It's not something that you can do in your spare time, so you need to be realistic about what it is that you're going to be doing, and make sure that you've got those target priorities so you go for opportunities that are right for you and right for your business, whether that be on geography, whether that be on delivery type or customer group. Have some parameters of what it is that you want to try and get out of bidding. Always look at the time frame. Is it a realistic time frame? Sometimes if it's a very, very short release, there may be a reason for it. It could well be that organizations are going through a process, so actually don't want lots of people to bid, and maybe going down that route. So if it's a very short time frame, ask yourself, is it realistic to do a decent quality tender in that time? Normally anything around about the 4-week mark is considered a realistic time frame. I know the West Midlands Combined Authority have given the market 3.5 weeks to respond to their AEB opportunities, with half term right in the middle of it, which was on the borderline of realistic. However, they didn't have an enormous tender compared to some of the other combined authorities, so I think there was a bit of give and take within those bits. For you as an organisation, always ask yourself, is it a punt or do you have a realistic chance of winning? Bidding for the sake of bidding is never a good idea, because ultimately you end up putting in a not particularly great bid. Human beings mark bids, not computers. So if they start to see your name bidding for everything and you're not putting in a particularly good product, whenever you do go for something that's you want to go for, there's always that doubt in the back of the marker's mind that it's these guys again and they're just chucking any old thing in. One thing to always consider is, does the outcome justify the input? So how big is the job compared to the contract value? And that's a decision that only you can make. Certain tenders are quite short and sharp and to the point, which I particularly like, and others are war and peace and a few other bits added on top. So you need to make the consideration of, if it's worth £5,000, do you really want to be writing 50 pages to win £5,000? So there's certain things that you just need to consider of does the end justify the means? Another key thing to think about is, can you allocate the time to do it? This isn't a lot of the time. This is a competition. This is a open and competitive market. So if you're trying to do something at 10 o'clock at night and that's the only time you can do it, I think there needs to be you need to ask yourself the question of whether that's the right thing to do, and is that time right to try and do it, or would you be better focusing your time doing other things? Okay, so that's the first half completed. So for the second part, we're now going to look at completing expressions of interest forms, and ultimately how to get selected. So
Steve, can I just sort of cut in? Just to say, we will have some time, I'm sure Steve will say at the end, for sort of Q&A, and you've got a function, hopefully, that you can see fairly easy on your screen to register questions if you've got any questions, which we'll pick up sort of at the end. So just thought that was worth sort of mentioning, and give Steve a chance to catch his breath, sort of thing. So it's back to you, Steve. That was it, really?
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. So in terms of expressions of interest, there's been a number out there of late. There's been a lot of activity again around AEB activities, also a number of different new funding routes that are starting to be released. So whenever we look at doing some subcontract activity, we always need to think about the reasons why organisations subcontract. So whenever they're looking for someone to work with them, the key three things they'll ever look at is capability. So what is the capability that you could bring to them? What geographies do you operate in and they operate in? So if they're looking at subcontracting, they're going to want to look at people that are in different geographies from themselves. And also they may well be looking for specific specialisms. So the National Citizen Service is a recent example of some procurement that's been going on and that needs some specific specialist support. So whether that's in engagement or delivering certain motivational programs and motivational activities, they're relating to different types of specialism. Whenever you look at an opportunity that's a subcontract opportunity, you always need to just ask yourself, can you provide one of the above for that specific opportunity? So what's the difference in your capability? Do you work in different geographies from the organisation that you're going to try and subcontract to? And then do you have a niche or a specialism that would really add value to that provider? Whenever you go down this route, or actually whenever you're looking at a tender, so if you're looking at a direct tender, always look at telling your story. So why your organisation rather than another? So what is it that makes you different? What makes you the organisation that is going to be strong within the sector? What makes you different? Wherever possible, always back up any information with data. So actually, you could say, "Oh, we work with lots and lots of learners." Well, what's lots and lots? Actually, having that number of learners, or having the number of achievements, the number of job outcomes, number of employers that you work with, the number of local organisations that you engage. Having that information really backs up your response. It always gives you a great deal of detail around what it is that you're saying, and gives the person who's reading it on the other end reassurance that you are who you say you are, and you are going to be able to do what you say you're going to do. Whenever you receive an EOI form, and I've filled in many EOI forms, and I've marked many EOI forms, my advice is always complete the form in the required manner. Somebody is marking these, and this is the same again with tenders. There is a set format that they've asked for, so please complete that in that format in which it's been asked. So a couple of key points: always answer the point asked, not what you want to say. There'll always be other opportunities in different parts of in the tender to answer different bits. So don't go off point. If the point's asking a specific, asking for something specific, make sure you answer that specific point. If there are a number of documents that the procurer or the provider is asked to you to provide, make sure that you provide those, make sure you have those in advance. So when you look at the opportunity, do you actually have the policies, and do you have all that information available to hand, or do you need to go and create something to be able to participate in this activity? It's broadly within the sector, but in the apprenticeship world, which does overlap with employment related services, the ROAPT refreshes out at the moment. There are a number of different policies that organisations, particularly smaller organisations, won't have, that need to be created as part of the submission. So when you get to looking at something that somebody wants, first things first, look at what the attachments are, and do you actually have those key attachments to be able to progress. So in terms of completing activity, so whether this be whether this is an expression of interest, or whether it's a buying group, so local authority, governmental department, a range of different bits, always make sure you select the right opportunity to go for. So this again will save you time and increase your chances of winning. So do your background research. So have you talked with the prime or the deliverer? Is there an opportunity to go and engage with them prior to bidding? If so, I would always recommend that you do that. A, it lets them know who you are, and B, prevents you from looking at opportunities that aren't really for you. What contracts do they currently deliver? So if you are looking at supporting somebody in a supply chain, ensure that before you bid with them, that they've got a good chance of winning. So if they don't have that track record or that experience of bidding or delivering in that area, then I would ask myself that question: is it worth spending time completing a form to be able to do that? Do they have a realistic chance of winning? So if you were going to go down Ladbrokes and put a bet on any tender opportunity, are they likely to be in the top three? Would you get an each way bet on them? Would you take an each way bet on them? If so, then there's probably one that you would want to work with. Listen to the market. I mean, there's a lot of great groups that URSA run. So there's always opportunity to meet our peers. So what do our peers say about some of the organisations that are putting out opportunity? We never want to fill something in and spend a lot of time filling something in if we think that it's just going to be utilised as bid candy, and people are going to just look at our ideas. What do our peers say about them? Is it a form filling exercise, or genuinely are they looking to work with a range of different organisations? And then finally, do you have a synergy with that organisation? So are they actually an organisation that you share values, you share vision, you share approaches with? And then if they are, then that's going to be a good opportunity for you to work with them. Finally, do they have the Merlin standard? I mean, the Merlin standard is a great barometer for understanding where organisations are and how fair and transparent they are with their supply chains. Is the key things their inspectors have observed. So actually, how are they looking after organisations? And then finally, do they have a clear process displayed on their website? So looking at what you're going to, if you're going to be working with them, if there's going to be a service fee, what do you get for that service fee, and does that represent value for money? So I used to work for Learn Direct of old, which was notorious for charging very high service fees. So if I was looking for some AEB work at that 3-4 years ago, would I really want to subcontract to Learn Direct? You need to ask yourself that question of whether that was a valid piece. Okay, so in terms of what to complete and when, there's a range of different things that we always need to do. So if we interject the word expression of interest with also DPS, so our colleagues at the Department of Work and Pensions have a couple of dynamic purchasing system opportunities out there. There is a number of different bits that you can do. So step one, once you've ascertained that the organisation is right for you, get the stage 1 process out the way. This can be completed at any time to do this as soon as possible. So a lot of organisations have a register with us type process or access onto the initial part of a dynamic purchasing system. So the Department of Work and Pension certainly do that with their DPS programs. So as this can be done at any time, you may as well get that out of the way, and then you're actually able to compete for monies at any one time. Whenever you're doing those, make sure that all your company information is up to date. So build a simple checklist to make sure all your documents and performance information is current, because ultimately this will save time further down the line. So whether this is things like your company accounts, ownership structure, company numbers, insurance documents, processes, so things like E&D policies, making sure that you've got all of those bits in place will actually save you a significant amount of time. Once you've done that first bit and you're able to compete for a number of opportunities, and mini competitions come up, always select the right opportunity. So is it actually the right one for you? If it's a DPS, you don't have to go for everything. Go for the things that are right for you. If we're looking at supply chain opportunity, can you add value? So if we go back to one of the first bits on there is actually, so what are you bringing to the party? If you're bringing the same stuff as the host already has, then actually you're not really bringing anything. So what can you do to be different? And then do you have a realistic chance of being selected? So is your offer what the buyer wants to buy? The fourth stage, review what it is that you've been doing. What is it they're asking for? And is there a sensible amount of, are they asking for a sensible amount of information? So make sure that what you're filling in is realistic to what you're likely to get out of it. So that's that point at the start. Does the ends justify the means? I remember when we were bidding for Flexible New Deal and the original iteration of work programme, there were a number of expression of interest forms that were just plain silly, that had 50, 60, 70 sides worth of information, which actually was bigger than the tender that the prime contractor had to submit. So actually, are they bidding by numbers, or actually are they asking you realistic information? If they're bidding by numbers, I would worry that they're actually going to be able to win anything from that point. And then in the fifth stage, make sure you give yourself time to complete the document. This is your opportunity to shine and be selected. Treat everything as a bid tender or a sales call or as a sales meeting. Always make sure you put your best foot forward, because it's the chance that you have to impress. Okay, so completing information and data. As I said earlier, answer what each specific question is asking, not what you want to tell someone. So all questions have been asked for a reason, and we'll have a scoring criteria and a set way of marking with them. So if there's a number of bullet points, make sure that you answer those bullet points. in the order in which they're asked. It just makes it easier for the reader to mark your bid and mark your activity and mark stuff as you go along. So please don't deviate away from this. You are the local specialist or the expert, so show your local or specialist knowledge. Try and tailor this so it's not something that could easily be found on the internet. So if you are just utilizing NOMIS data, actually, well, what do you know that's different? What do you know that's better within your local area? What's the thing that's different for you? What is your point of difference? So work this through the response and have this as a thread that joins your answers together. So you could be a BAME specialist. So actually have that throughout each question that it's relevant to, and making sure that you drive home the point that you are the guys to come to when it comes to working within certain communities within our localities. As I touched on earlier, always back your statements up with data. Data proves a point, and it can also be a point of difference. So things like high job outcome rates, high sustainment rates, things like that will really set you apart from other organisations, particularly when the reader has a limited amount of time to read the document. And then finally, what is being asked for. So again, as I touched on, always make sure that you've got everything you need and don't leave anything out, because ultimately it'll just make you non-compliant and you've spent a lot of time doing the activity, and you may well get nothing out of it for that amount of time. So finally, my top 5 bidding tips. Always answer the question, not what you want to say. I must have said it 3 or 4 times in the last half an hour, but it is so critical. I went to a bidder briefing for it was the LSC at the time, and that was the one message that someone who was part of the procurement team said, and he said it more than I say it, and that's always stuck with me. Always just answer that question, and when you're reading your response back, does it answer the question that's being asked? Number 2, never assume the reader marker knows your business or understands an acronym. So even if you've done quite a lot of engagement with the buyer, make sure that you spell things out for people. As a sector, we are particularly prone to using acronyms. So if you are going to use an acronym, make sure that you write it first in full. So then the marker can find what it is that it means. Always use the space given. So the reader is expecting a certain level of detail. So if they're asking for 2,000 characters, then give them 2,000 characters worth of detail. Don't give them 40 or 50, because ultimately you're not answering the question to the level of detail that they're looking to have. If they want 500 words, give them as close to 500 words of detail as you possibly can. However, as with everything in life, there is a double-edged sword. Make sure that your answers are clear and concise, and that you don't waffle whilst answering those. Always make your response easy to read. So think about the reader and how have you laid out your answer, and answer to the layout and breakdown of the question. So white space on a page is your friend. If you're looking at character count, pressing return doesn't use a character. So wherever possible, try and not squash everything together. It just makes it really difficult to read, and makes it difficult for the marker to evaluate the question in that way. And as I said, if there's a breakdown in the question, there's certain things being asked in a certain order, then please answer them in that order. And then finally, be compliant with what's being requested. So there will be in a number of different pieces, there are a number of things that you'll be asked for. Make sure that you send everything that you're meant to do. Make sure that you answer within the character counts given. Don't change the layout of the form or add in some additional documentation or additional activities, because ultimately it won't get marked, and you'll just end up ultimately annoying the person that's marking it. So that's it from me. So I think we've got one question, Roger.
Yeah, can you see it, Steve? Have you got it? Or shall I read it?
Okay, yep. So the question is, increasingly, and particularly with devolved budget, emphasis seems to be placed on fairly specialist sectors for employability and training contracts. for providers working at a more foundation level or that have a more generic offer, is it still worth them bidding and making other arguments for inclusion in supply chain, i.e. customer groups experience? So yes, my short answer to that is yes. So this comes back to us as telling the story, and I'm assume this is asked based on some of the stuff that's come out in the West Midlands, where there seemed to be almost a phobia from the buyer around employability qualifications and lower end employability type activity. What they're trying to get away from is training or activity for activity's sake. One of the key things that, if you're going to deliver a certain course, is to make sure it has an outcome and an output for it, and describe what that outcome or output is. So if it's helping people take that first step towards the more specialist bit, there is always an ecosystem in delivery. There is always a wider spectrum of things that need to be done. So yes, it's about making your argument as to why you do that activity and making it worthwhile for that buyer, and understand what the buyer is trying to buy.
Okay, hopefully that answers your questions. Any other sort of questions at all? While you're thinking about that, just to say this webinar is being recorded, so we will publish it on the at the IHRSA on a YouTube sort of channel. It's not an IHRSA YouTube channel, but it'll be published so that people, if people joined late or wanted to refer back, that opportunity will be there. Oh yeah, we had a feedback. Thank you, very helpful on that question. So that's good. Any other sort of questions at all? I think you stunned them into silence. I don't know. It'd be interesting to know whether our sector is, acronym heavy. It feels like it's acronym heavy, sort of thing. But I just wonder if you delved into another sector, whether the other sectors are as acronym heavy as ours seem to be.
I suspect they are. I know I did some stuff for a printer, and I had to learn a whole new different language. So. Yeah, and again, similarly, I've done some stuff with on the T-level activity and the opportunities for organisations to create the T-levels. Yeah, there is a load more acronyms. So the key thing always to remember is that the reader may not know what the acronym is. So I always use the Steve's mum test. So if my mum will know what the acronym is, then it's right to use. If my mum's going to go, "What on earth are you talking about?" then maybe look at explaining it first and using something else.
While people are possibly sort of still thinking, you mentioned West Midlands is out at the moment. Is there anything else off the sort of top of your head that's kind of sort of out there that
so
considering should be?
So the National Career Service, not National Citizen Service, are looking for additional input in potential supply chains. That's stuff that came out in the last week or so. There's innovation funds around delivery of support programs within our sector. There has been a lot of procurement recently around ESF and what's left of the ESF pot, but a lot of those, there's still an awful lot of money that hasn't been allocated and hasn't been spent. So over the next 6-7 months, I imagine there'll be more of those types of programs coming out and mop up of underspend happening as we look to exit the European Union. I know there's been a number of other funds, Roger, that IHRSA have been involved in and promoting. So there's a whole range of different things that are out there for this.
Absolutely. Yeah, we did some work with the Government Equalities Office and held an event sort of last week. Not a huge amount of money, or the Returners Fund round sort of 3. So there's you can get information on our sort of website or on sort of the Rocket Science or Government Equalities Office sort of website as well. So thanks for sort of mentioning sort of that.
No problem. I mean, things like the big lottery, particularly for our charities in IHRSA, are always looking to put out funds. So there is always something.
Okay. So I don't know. I think you've stunned everyone into silence. I think don't think we've had any more sort of questions sort of at all. did you want to rerun your poll? Sort of thing? Did you want...
Yeah, we can do. So I'll get it to the right page. So just following the 40-minute session today, just thinking about how confident you are now. So are you not at all confident? So the top one, a bit more confident, more confident. So the third one down, much more confident or super confident.
Steve, I've messed up the. I've completely messed this up. So apologies to the audience. I haven't got the second half of these sort of polls sort of in there. So I'll say this.
So if we go from 1 to 5 from top to bottom, that would be great. I've moved it out of the way so everyone can see it. So yeah, if you just give a quick 10-second bit for those everyone.
Quick blast. Yeah. So it's my incompetence as chair.
Okay, so where has that got us, Roger?
Yeah, that looks as we're more towards the sort of the more confident, much more confident than we were, I think, sort of at the beginning.
Okay.
So that's it's gone in the right direction, Steve. So I think
that's all good. I'm glad.
I won't share the results of that because it's the question doesn't quite fit. So that's
okay.
Completely my fault.
No problem. We all make mistakes now and again. I know I make plenty. So so Roger's going to send the team going to send the slides out. So if you were interested in knowing a little bit more or want to speak to me about opportunities around bidding and tendering or need some support around those bits, my contact details are just on screen now. I am on Twitter and on LinkedIn, so I have a social media man who helps me out and badgers me constantly for new stuff to put up. So please, it'd be great if you would like to follow me. I'd really appreciate it. And then I believe after the webinar, everyone gets a survey. Is that right, Roger?
Yes, it may be. It may not be today, but we will send one out. It'll be tomorrow at the very latest. So we will have a survey, so you can sort of tell us what you think, because we can only make it better with a bit of feedback. Really. So,
okay.
So great. Well, thank you everyone for sort of joining us. We're 5 to 1, so that's so we're well within sort of the time that we originally sort of said. So thank you everyone for sort of joining us. And as I say, we'll send out the slides, we'll send out feedback, and the webinar will be available via a link that we will send out. A recording will be available via a link that we send out afterwards. So thank you everyone for sort of joining us. We'll sign off sort of now. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.